Hello again, and today is, when you are watching this, it will be Mother's Day, and so I'm going to be talking about that here in a little bit. First of all, I want to refer to another package that was on my porch this week, and this one was from an anonymous individual, and it's another Batman mug. How about that? And this one has the shape of his face and everything. Isn't that cool? And in the package was another one just like this and two Wonder Woman mugs. And so there, so you can see, oh, I shouldn't have, oh, that's okay, it didn't hurt it. But my producer is using the Wonder Woman mug today, and since I have to talk a lot, I'm using Batman. So I can get a drink now and then. So I guess we'll move on now, and by the way, all Bat Toasts are non-alcoholic by nature. Just wanted you to know that what's in that cup is what's supposed to be in that cup. Mother's Day. When the late First Lady Barbara Bush was still the First Lady, she made the famous observation that success does not depend upon what happens in the White House. It depends on what happens in your house. And what she was underscoring there is the idea that the family is a microcosm of society, and as goes the family, so goes society. So if you've got a bunch of dysfunctional families out there, then society, the nation, and even the world is going to be more dysfunctional. And so character traits like fidelity, hard work, honesty, and respect of authority are best learned within the context of a loving, nurturing, but disciplining family. God created the family as recorded in the first two chapters of Genesis. He began with man and woman. That's how he began the family, with a man and a woman, two opposite but complementary entities, interdependent in their roles of establishing and nurturing a family. Came up with that definition myself, but it's based upon a lot of study that I've done, and again, that is that God began with man and woman, two opposite but complementary entities, interdependent in their roles of establishing and nurturing a family. Genesis 1:27 and 28 says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground.'" God created male and female in the image of God. We may often think that being created in the image of God, we think of it in terms of the special dignity that humanity has over the rest of creation, and that is true. That's one way to think about the image of God. But it also means some different things in this passage. Being made in the image of God is bound up with human dominion over creation. We are God's representatives on earth to whom he has delegated the rule of the world. That doesn't mean we are free to exploit it, but dominion means responsible management. Ancient kings would exercise authority over nations and then place their statue throughout the land just to remind people or keep them reminded of who the king is. Human beings bear the image of God throughout the world, which testifies to the wonder of our Creator. We exist in the image of God as both male and female. If one of the sexes were to disappear from the earth, the image of God would not be adequately represented. It would be skewed. There would be something seriously lacking. In the image of God, he created them male and female. To bear the image of God on earth is bound up with being created male or female. With the family being a microcosm of society, the ideal circumstance requires both a male and female presence, both a mother and a father. You've got to get male and female both in order to have procreation. Male and female, he created them, saying, "Be fruitful and increase in number." And also deeply intertwined with bearing God's image is the phenomenon of human procreation. As God created life in the world, humans are able to partner with him in the creation of new creatures also made in the image of God. Procreation requires both male and female. They each bring a unique contribution to the mix. They are both essential and both required. Their biological differences complement each other in the acts of procreation. The biological but complementary differences do not stop with the reproductive system, because there are many other ways that male and female are different. Now, you might hear differently these days, regardless of men who want to run in women's races or visit women's restrooms. Just because you think you are female, that doesn't mean that you are. You don't get to pick and choose, but how you feel is irrelevant. Biology is the objective proof of sex and gender. Because man and woman are different, you need both a father and a mother for procreation, and you ideally need both in order to have a functional family. To lack either is to invite dysfunction. Now, I'm not saying that some single parents haven't done a good job raising great kids, nor am I saying that kids cannot sometimes rise above their less than ideal home life, nor am I saying that both parents in a home guarantee a functional home life. If one parent is abusive, for example, a specific home might be better off with just one parent for the protection of the other parent and the children. But the maximum advantage for children to be raised is by two nurturing parents, one biological male, one biological female. It's how God set it up, and you cannot improve on that. What I'm arguing is that every family needs a mother in the household. Mothers are not expendable. Since men and women are different, there are some things that a man just cannot do. Now, conversely, a father is just as important in the household, because there are some things a woman cannot do, because men and women are wired differently, and they each play instinctive roles in the household. There are some things men cannot do. For example, men cannot get pregnant, have babies, or nurse children. Now, you might have heard about a man who got pregnant, but it wasn't really a man. It was a woman masquerading as a man. Men cannot have babies, and we should have learned that before kindergarten. Not only can men not get pregnant, but in no other way can a man be an adequate mother. We all admit that in the animal kingdom, the male and female species have different instinctive intuitions. I mean, both mothers and fathers play an instinctive role because they are wired differently, and why some cannot figure out that that's also true of humans is beyond me. But some behaviors are more instinctively mother behaviors, and others are more instinctively father behaviors. Now, that isn't to say that in some cases the roles aren't reversed. For example, your father might have been more nurturing than your mother. It happens. Nothing wrong with that. Sometimes the roles are not that tightly separated. Exceptions do exist, but typically speaking, if a child needs nurturing, if a child has a boo-boo, the child goes to the mother. But if a child wants permission to go to the movies or go bungee jumping or go ziplining, they'll go see their dad, because he's not, all hung up on safety and everything. But if either is missing from the picture, the child will need positive adult influences of the opposite sex who is absent from the home, perhaps aunts or uncles or grandparents and so forth. But my point is that the mother is not expendable. When Moses gave the law, the fifth of the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20:12 is honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. While some have accused the Bible of being sexist and misogynist, when you compare the other ancient cultures with Jewish or Hebrew culture, you find that there was a world of difference in regard to how women were treated and considered. And it is very clear that in other ancient cultures, the male usually had all the consideration and all the privileges. It was very clear. And to this day, women in Judeo-Christian households are living much better lives than in radical Muslim, Hindu, or other religious households. And so the dignity of motherhood is underscored in Exodus 20:12, where the people are told not only to honor their father, but also their mother. That was almost unheard of in other ancient Near Eastern literature. In this and other regards, the law of Moses was revolutionary among the law codes. In fact, Leviticus 19:3 places the mother first in regard to honoring parents. It says, each of you must respect his mother and his father, and you must observe my Sabbaths. I am the Lord. To have the mother mentioned at all, much less mentioned first, was unheard of among most ancient cultures. It should not be surprising that honor for parents and Sabbath keeping are mentioned in the same verse, because the Sabbath was not only to be a day of rest, but a day when families came together, when they stopped working and made this a day of sacred assembly. God expected families to worship together. And moreover, both the Sabbath and the command to honor parents stand at the mid-position, the midpoint position of the Ten Commandments, right between the commands to love God and the commands to love neighbor. The commands to love God include the first three commands: don't have any other gods, make no idols, and do not take the Lord's name in vain. Next comes the Sabbath, which points both ways. It points backward to the command to love God, and it points forward to the commands to love other people. It's a day set aside, like I said, not only for rest, but for sacred assembly. The scripture reference on that is Leviticus 23:3. But it expresses love for neighbor, and it's love for neighbor because not only do you get a day off, but so does anyone who works for you. Then after the Sabbath comes honor for parents, and we could say that points both ways too, back to honoring God and forward toward loving your neighbor. Of course, parents are the people who are your first and closest neighbors. And this command is followed by prohibitions against murder, adultery, bearing false witness, etc. So honor for parents also stands at the hinge between loving God and loving neighbor and includes both. It expresses love for God in that your parents are very much God's representatives in your life. Not that they are to be your idols, and if there is ever a conflict between obeying parents or obeying God, we must obey God rather than men or women. But on the other hand, there is a sense in which parents model God to their children. They have partnered with Him in procreation, endowing you with life itself. They are also your first caretakers, of whom you are completely dependent in your earliest years. They are your protectors and providers. As men and women are images of God in human society, your parents bear God's image in the household, which is the microcosm of human society, for God has delegated to them the dominion over family. The parental relationship is also where we learn submission to authority. If parents don't discipline their children now, the civil authorities will have to do it later. How many times have we heard when people had either abusive or overly permissive parents that they have trouble relating to God? That's because people tend to view God through the lens of their parents. And, for example, I've known a woman who was abused by her father as a child. She has a very difficult time accepting God as a father figure, accepting God at all. But my main point today is that the mother is just as essential as the father. In both child conception and in child rearing, both parents are important for a child to have in the home. The best way for a boy to learn how to be a man and how to relate to women is to have both a father and a mother in the home. And the best way for a girl to learn how to be a woman and how to relate to men is to have both a mother and a father in the home. And if either is missing, then something has gone awry. But again, that doesn't mean that some kids won't rise above their upbringing or that some single parents haven't found ways to compensate for the lack of the other parent. But again, we're talking about the ideal here. And if you had the ideal situation of a loving father and a loving mother in the home, then you are exceptionally blessed among the masses. I believe that in most marriages, one or the other spouse will eventually get to the point, at some point in their marriage, they'll get to the point where they just want to pack a suitcase and run away. And maybe you felt that way as a spouse or a parent. At times you just want to pack a suitcase and run away. Although, marriage is hard. Marriage takes work. That's what I'm saying. Marriage takes work. It's like the military. It's the toughest job you'll ever love. But I do know couples, or have known couples, who claimed that they never had a fight. And they are very godly couples, except for that one lie. Well, no, I don't know that they're lying, really. Maybe they're telling the truth. Maybe they really never did have a fight. I just know that I'm not in one of those couples. But usually people do have disagreements. People do have arguments, and you should honor your parents if they both made the effort to remain together in spite of all life's ups and downs. They did you a great favor. Now, I know that in households where abuse is frequent or fidelity is absent, that sometimes divorce may seem to be the only viable option for a parent or child to be protected. But that isn't usually the case. When you get divorced, and I'm not picking on divorced people, that's one of the most painful things, if not the most painful thing people can go through, and I'm not trying to berate or belittle anyone, but just give a little preventative medicine here for those who might be considering it. But when you get divorced, you need to realize that you're not just breaking up a couple, you're breaking up an institution. A financial institution, an economic institution, among other things, but definitely a family institution that affects a lot more people than just those in the nuclear family. For example, it will affect most of the people you know. It will affect your friends, and it's true that usually one spouse or the other gets the friends in a divorce. Or if you had your friends, she had her friends, then your friends go with the one they were already friends with. But if you were friends with other couples, sometimes they will feel awkward now relating to you as a single because the dynamics have completely changed. And then if you get remarried, then that's even more awkward. The dynamics have changed even more. And so it's very awkward with your friendship. Some of them will abandon you altogether. You may lose the support of in-laws. You will lose connection with perhaps nieces and nephews by marriage. It's a whole different world. You'll be left out of a lot of the things your kids do. But the people who suffer most will be those children. When holidays roll around, they're going to have to decide how they're going to spend Christmas, who are they going to spend it with, and things can get rather complicated. And again, I'm not trying to berate anyone. I realize that so much of life is not the ideal, but before you consider divorce, think of all the ties you'll be breaking and all the people you'll be affecting. My point is not that you hold a grudge against your divorced parents, because I'm sure there were dynamics that went on of which you were not even aware. But if you had parents who stuck it out and stayed together, that is certainly worth recognizing, and their anniversaries are worth celebrating. How do we honor our parents, and especially our mothers? Well, I'm astounded to find that in the book of Proverbs, mothers are mentioned quite frequently, right along with the father, suggesting different ways that they might be honored. First, of course, parents are to be honored with obedience. Our kids used to ask Gretchen every year, "What do you want for Mother's Day?" And she would say, "Children that behave." And she always got that because either they behaved badly or they behaved well, but she always got children who behaved some way. But of course she meant she wanted children who behaved well, which they usually did. But that frustrated them. It drove the kids crazy when she said that, because they were thinking of some material thing that you could go out and buy. But Gretchen, being the least materialistic person I've ever known, has a lot of trouble suggesting gifts for herself. But obedience is the first best way that minor children can honor their parents. In Proverbs 1:8, the reader is told, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." Yes, even the mother's teaching is to be taken to heart. In addition to obedience, parents hope that the good things they tried to teach you will stay with you throughout adulthood. It's disappointing when our children mess up and we know that we did not raise them to be that way. We raised them better than that. You just hope and pray that they'll come around. But in the meantime, it can be heart-wrenching. Just focusing on the effects of mothers, though, in Proverbs 10:1, we read that a foolish son brings grief to his mother. Proverbs 17:25 says that a foolish son brings bitterness to the mother who bore him. And 15:20 says a foolish man despises his mother. Even if your mother wasn't much to brag about, grudge-bearing and resentment is only going to harm you. If you ever go to counseling, the first thing that a therapist is going to want to know, in most cases, is what it was like growing up in your household. What was your family of origin like? Did you get along with your mother, your father, all that sort of thing? Because the therapist wants to know where you came from, how your formative years might have shaped you. And they do shape all of us, and the things we experience in those years stick to us the rest of our lives, and they affect the way that we interact with people. They affect our responses to others. They are far more powerful, those formative experiences, than we ever thought possible. But we are under obligation to honor our parents the best way that we can. Many in our congregation right now are in the 50-something crowd, as my wife and I are, and so many of us know what it's like to have aging parents or in-laws, parents who are becoming less independent and needing more care and more visits, and it's difficult to parent your parents. And some of us start with that at a far younger age than anyone should ever have to. It's difficult when you have to be strong for your parents. But it's a way of expressing gratitude for all they've done for you. And most of us, with rare exception, will never have to do more for our parents than what they have done for us. If your mother was to hand you a bill for everything that you owed her for childhood, she hands you a bill when you turn 18, and you have to pay for everything she's done for you, I tell you what, you're going to be in debt the rest of your life. Student loans have nothing on this. If you had to pay your mother back for the constant care and nurturing she gave you, you'd be paying forever. But one way we can honor our parents is to serve their physical needs. While the early church took on the financial support of widows, Paul said that the church should not have to if the widow's relatives could do so. And he said in 1 Timothy 5:8 that if anyone does not provide for his own relatives, he is worse than an unbeliever. But I know the sad truth is that some parents are toxic. With some parents, to continue a relationship or to get too close to them could be very toxic to the family that you are now trying to raise, the family that you have started since your family of origin. The best-selling book, Hillbilly Elegy, is the memoir of J.D. Vance, a man who came from humble beginnings in Middletown, Ohio. He grew up in the working-class family descended from Kentucky hillbillies, with a mother who at times was drug-addicted and had a revolving door of men coming in and out of the house, father figures that Vance would latch on to and then eventually lose. And his mother was very much scarred as a child by alcoholism in the home and parents who fought all the time. And poverty was always a looming threat in these families. But Vance did well for himself. Getting out of high school, first serving in the United States Marine Corps, then going on to make very good grades at Ohio State, and finally becoming a law student, being accepted into Yale Law School, where he met a wife from a stable family. Now, she has since clerked for Chief Justice John Roberts, and currently they're married. They have a child and a $1 million home in Cincinnati. Netflix bought the rights to Vance's story, and it's now a movie directed by Ron Howard to be released in November. I'm kind of excited about it, but I have some misgivings because Hollywood has ruined a lot of good books. But we'll see what happens this time. But some of the most poignant parts of the book for me is where J.D. talks about his mother. One chapter begins with him standing at the hotel or at the window of a sleazy roadside motel late at night, where he pays the bill for his homeless, heroin-addicted mother to stay there for the week until she can get back on her feet. Turns out she had stolen a family heirloom from her fifth husband in order to buy drugs, and he kicked her out. And so now her son bails her out, just as her parents had bailed her out time and again throughout her adult life. Standing that night at the sleazy motel, Vance recalls thinking that he wasn't supposed to be there, that he had structured his entire life to avoid just these types of places. And he said that the life he had left always found a way to reel him back in. So I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from that particular chapter by J.D. Vance. Hillbilly Elegy is the name of the book. He says, "I'd sworn to myself I'd never help Mom again, but the person who made that oath had changed. I was exploring, however uneasily, the Christian faith that I'd discarded years earlier. I had learned for the first time the extent of Mom's childhood emotional wounds, and I realized that those wounds never truly heal, even for me. So when I discovered that Mom was in dire straits, I didn't mutter insults under my breath and hang up the phone. I offered to help her. I'd like to say that helping Mom came easily, that I had made peace with my past and was able to fix a problem that had plagued me since elementary school. There is room now for both anger at Mom for the life she chooses and sympathy for the childhood she didn't." Now, that last sentence really grabs me, really resonates with me. It's okay to be angry at Mom for the life she chose, but sympathetic because of the childhood she did not. And then he continues, "There is room where I can help when I can, when finances and emotional reserves allow me to care in the way Mom needs. But there is also recognition of my own limitations, and also my willingness to separate myself from Mom when engagement means too little money to pay my own bills or too little patience left over for the people who matter most." Obviously, he was writing this before he was wealthy himself. But much of what I've just read, it also deeply resonates with me, because I come from similar beginnings as J.D. Vance. I myself have bailed my mother out at times. She died 5 years ago, but when she was living, I bailed her out several times, and especially in the earlier days of her second divorce. I tracked her from one sleazy motel to another, trying to find her at times, and though the drug of choice for my parents was always alcohol and not heroin, I sometimes wonder to myself if in the earlier days maybe I did too much for my mom, maybe I was too involved in her life, and then in the latter days maybe not enough. I don't know. I know my younger sister did a much better job taking care of Mom in her later in life, although of course I wasn't around anyhow. I moved far away, but Vance described one way that one man from a dysfunctional background still managed to honor his mother. And I'm happy to say that I've read since what Vance has written on the internet. His mother is now off drugs and has been doing well for several years. Not many mothers do everything wrong, And mine certainly did some things right. And hopefully yours did too. And I hope that you'll find a way to honor her not only today, but every day. Happy Mother's Day.